On one hand, you want your children to make new friends, right? On the other, you feel a little nervous about your kids spending time with people you don't know in the homes of families maybe you've never met. Parenting contributor Heather Johnson wants you to feel less anxious in these scenarios since it is important for our kids to form new connections. She joins me to share how, calm our fears, hold our hand, do all of it. I was just telling you, Heather, we're in a new neighborhood. We're meeting new friends, which is wonderful. And I find myself throwing out, when people come over, what I wish parents would throw out to me, right? The no pets, no guns, no screens when friends are over. It feels awkward and sort of formal and sort of judgy to ask that and do that, but those are the anxieties that you're talking about here.
Absolutely, those are the things we're worried about. We're worried about those things you just mentioned, and we're also worried about even smaller things like, I don't know, is there going to be a lot of screen time in this home? Is there going to be situations where maybe they're eating or viewing things we're not comfortable with? And then there's the really, really big things, and those are those big fears that always sit in the back of our minds, which is there going to be abuse or molestation? Are we going to kidnap? Those are real worries and fears, and it makes it really hard sometimes to send our kids. This is happening right now. They're meeting new friends. School's just started. We've got study groups and we've got play dates. We've got all these things going on. And there are those worries. When we get filled with that anxiety, it makes it really hard for us to see how important these experiences are for our kids. We want them to have these experiences. So the best thing we can do is learn to navigate that anxiousness and handle it so that they can have the experiences and also we can have the peace.
Yeah, there needs to be almost an action here, which is where you're pointing us today, because I'm not necessarily an anxious person, but if I sit and let those thoughts sit with me, it's going to grow and things aren't going to get better. So let's talk about how we can parent with less fear. You say those thoughts are the first thing we need to mind and be aware of.
We do. We've got to be really aware of the narrative of what we've got running in our head. If our kids going out somewhere means that they're going to get kidnapped or that something negative is going to happen to them, if we're constantly going with I know, but what if this and what if that and what if they don't, we're in trouble. And so are our kids. They will feel that and sense that. If we have a mentality that everyone is out to get them, that there is no place that's safe for them, that if they go, they won't, they're going to learn something that we're uncomfortable with and then we're going to have to undo. If those are the mentalities and the thoughts we have, we won't be able to see how powerful these experiences are for our kids, and that anxiousness will take over. We will helicopter and keep them in, and they won't have those experiences. So we want to make sure that we start there, that we're watching our thoughts so that we can have a clean mind to then send them out to a healthy space. The other thing is if our thoughts aren't clean, then we don't understand how important it is to educate our kids. And that's something so powerful that we want to make sure we're doing for our anxiety, if we have it or if we're worried, and also for theirs. We have to educate our kids before we send them out to spend time in other people's homes, right? We want them to know personal information, which is like going the way of the dinosaurs these days. To ask a kid what their phone number is or their parents' phone numbers, or to ask a child, do you know your address? They need personal information. They need to understand safety. You mentioned guns. One for us is always, is there going to be water there? Do you stay at this house? Or are you allowed to roam the neighborhood? Those are safety issues. You want to educate your kids so they know, what do you do if you happen to see or be presented with some of these situations? We want to educate them when it comes to body safety and what those rules look like. And one that we don't talk about enough is we actually want to educate our kids about the difference between a teenager and an adult. So that when they're in other people's homes, they know who it is that they should be listening to, who it is that potentially is in charge. Oftentimes, especially young kids, get it confused and think teenagers are adults when they're not. And sometimes that can lead to teenagers maybe asking of our kids things that aren't comfortable or appropriate. So to educate them is so, so important. We've got to educate them.
And with that comes communication. And you say that communication needs to be upfront and it needs to happen before.
It does, if we can. Now, there's always that situation, right? You pick up your kids from school and somebody runs out and says, Mom, can I have a play date with so-and-so right this second? Can I go home with them? And we run into that too, and there still can be room for conversations. These are what you were just talking about, where you're talking to other parents saying, hey, I'm not criticizing in any way and I'm not judging. I just want to have a conversation about safety.
Why is this so awkward? Because I'm a confident person and these are questions I know I have the right to ask, but it is so uncomfortable to ask those questions of another adult.
Yeah, sometimes it's because we are afraid that they're going to think we're judging that way, that we're saying to them, oh, well, you're not worried about this and you don't take care of this and you must not take this into consideration. And we have to realize that, like you said, it is our responsibility to ask those questions, and we would never want our insecurities to trump helping our children be safe. Ever. And when we can just think of it like that, it'll make it much easier to have those conversations. You want to be asking, again, about safety, right? right? What does happen? Is there water involved? Do you have pets that we need to worry about? What does this look like when it comes to, again, guns or screen time?
Screen time is a big one, and that's
It's
a
a big
new
one.
one in the conversation. But for example, my child is not going to play YouTube at your house. We have to say that ahead of time.
We have to say that ahead of time. I know a big one actually for me is that if they're going to ride anything with wheels, they wear a helmet, which is funny because I grew up never wearing a helmet ever. I don't even know if we owned one.
You California
but
girl.
I know, but that is a thing. I want to make sure, and our girls, our kids know that. But when they get to another home, it's very quick. You know, I've had parents say to our girls, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or you're just riding a scooter. The street is flat. So to communicate and say, hey, do they need to bring a helmet with them, or do you have one that they can use there? Those types of comments and conversations allow us to bypass our insecurities and be really comfortable and confident owning that space for our kids, so we know that there's that safety.
Your next point might seem obvious, but I think it's a really reassuring point to tell yourself that I am available. I will be available during this play date or during this time away.
It's exactly right. You know, we just experienced this. Our daughter, who's 15, she reached out to me while at someone else's home through a text message and said, hey, Mom, they're asking me some really uncomfortable questions about how you and Dad parent and about politics, and it doesn't feel safe. Now, she is
what a wise
able
girl.
to handle all the things.
Sure.
She is a fireball and can navigate those situations. So that lets me know if she's reaching out that way, she's not comfortable, or she rarely reaches out in those situations. To be available so that they can send that text, to be available so we can respond to it, put somebody available. It doesn't matter, I mean, someone they trust, even if it's a grandparent, to say, hey, this kid is off on this study, whatever, or play date. If they reach out, just know that they might, because I'm not. Put someone in charge so that they can reach out if they need to, or they need picked up, or they need brought home early.
On the other side, you want us to always debrief.
Yeah, this is, I'm not going to say more important, but I am going to for sure say as important as educating. We have to debrief once they come home from other people's experiences and homes and places.
Teenagers too.
Everyone. We are not just talking about small children, even though that's where maybe a lot of these conversations are happening. We tend to trust people we know. We think that that's how we trust. We should trust people we know. And although we can do that, if you'll debrief with your kids with questions such as, did you enjoy yourself? How did you spend your time? To ask them what was a favorite part and what was a least favorite part. We for sure want to ask them, did you feel safe? And again, teenagers or children alike, did you feel safe? To make sure that we specifically look at them and say, were those body rules adhered to? Were you safe when it comes to that? Instead of trusting people that we know, we actually want to trust the people that our children give positive responses to those questions about.
Okay.
If you're asking those questions and you're continuing to get positive responses to them from your children, from your teenagers, that would be a good place to consider trusting.
So you're watching their affect and you're watching their response.
And we tend to say, well, I know you, so it's okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right? We were talking before about plenty of situations where we've known the people and it hasn't turned out the way that we hope. So ask those questions, and if there's positive responses, you can start to consider what trust could look like there.
And finally, speaking of trust, we have to trust ourselves.
Always trust your gut. Always. If you talk to a doctor, if you talk to a psychiatrist, you know, pediatrician, they're going to say, hey, if your gut is saying something's uncomfortable, trust it and go with it, even if you get pushback from your kids when it comes to these situations. Now, sometimes that is just that uncomfortable of, I don't know you and I need more information.
Sure.
So get creative. Take the study group or the play date to the park and be there too. Invite that child to your house instead of sending your child to theirs so you can gather a little bit more information. Rethink and get really creative so that you can start to gather more data and more information, or to buy yourself some time to have some of those crucial conversations, or even to buy yourself some time to educate your children so that you can make sure they have that education. And then by all means, teach them to go and have the experiences, to learn how to share, to learn how to communicate, to learn how to cooperate. We have to figure out how to do that. And we actually need to figure out how to do that in other people's spaces.
Yeah.
So it's really beneficial.
I enjoyed this conversation, Heather. Thank you so much. Heather has a private practice. She coaches and counsels families and individuals. You can find her contact information on our website.